What goes into better, and I wanted to kind of touch on that because that's where a lot of the safety thing, when I looked at this and we were prepping for this, the safety thing is obvious, right? Newer cars, safer. They just are.
Right.
It's just the way it is. And then you look at things like, forget who mentioned it in chat, but they said serviceability, reliability, right? So like an older car, less going on, pretty much. Going to be easier to service, right? Instead of getting a laptop out to try to figure out ignition timing, you could go and look at the distributor. You know, you might have some points out
Right.
and things like that. Spark plugs, much easier. Tuning the car, right? It was, okay, well, here's this carburetor, it's too big. Or this carburetor's too big, let's jet it down. My father actually had a 650 dual pumper on his Corvette, which had a 327 board stroked, balanced, blueprinted, out to roughly 360 cubic inches, and that carburetor was for something much larger, so he was just not burning all the fuel, so he had the smallest possible jets on it, right? So that's how you're tuning fuel delivery. Steve wonders if his 99 Grand Cherokee is safe, looks at Jeep, laughs. Pretty much
It is not.
and then, you know, so reliability, whether you like it or not, it seems counterintuitive because modern cars are way more complicated, right? There's more going on in the cheapest car that you could possibly buy than there was on the most luxurious, most advanced car made in the 60s and 70s. It's just how the nature of progress. But modern cars are pretty much more reliable. You don't have to worry about rebuilding carbs. Most cars, your suspension's pretty good for over 100,000 miles, struts, things like that. You know, bushings, same basic story unless you live in salt flats of New Jersey. So like there's a lot of that
The
stuff.
reliability thing is like it's always like the newest car is the most reliable no matter what generation you're in, because nowadays like there's warranties with cars too, things you did not get back in like the 50s, 60s, maybe even the
Well, that
70s.
just
I
goes
don't
to
know.
show how
Don't check my-
unreliable they were. They had to say,
Well,
we'll fix
right.
it for free. Just buy, please. Just buy the car.
Right. Yeah. And then, you know, you have the warranties nowadays, but like the cars of the 80s were more reliable than the 70s because they were newer, they weren't going to break, the parts weren't as old. The same thing with the 90s. The 90s cars were
there was an adjustment curve when they got rid of leaded fuel. Because leaded fuel added
Right.
as like a lubricant
Yes.
and things like that. So there was a learning curve with that. Same thing with like the ethanol based cars, that when E85 became a thing, you had to upgrade the fuel lines, otherwise they sort of leaked and caught your car on fire. Coyote can't catch a Roadrunner,
that's
let
true.
alone an LS. False. Moving on.
I mean, that's actually true since he's referencing the
I understand
cartoon.
that. But if Wile E. Coyote was driving a Coyote powered vehicle, the Roadrunner would be a smear on the pavement.
I mean, the reliability thing is like, you know, the newer car is almost always going to be the more reliable car. So again, modern cars win over older cars. I think the only place where they don't build them like they used to really still applies is what you mentioned before is design. There are some beautiful cars these days, really are. Pagani comes to mind. Pagani, Koenigsegg is considered very beautiful. A lot of the coach builders and stuff like that. But like mass market cars, there are very few truly beautiful cars these days because there's a lot of design that's centered around that safety. Higher belt lines don't necessarily lead to good design as far as like the beautification of cars. But if you look back in like the 40s, they are even way further back in that 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, that 40-year gap was like as cars coming into their own, there was empty sheet of paper and people just going to town on ideas. That is the era of just pure automotive design. I'm not a huge fan of the era just because I'm not the biggest fan of cars from that era, but I respect and believe that that is the best era for design as a creative. Like I'm a writer and I work with graphic designers almost every day of my life at my job. Just being in this, like in the advertising industry for like 15 years and getting really into aesthetics, I respect and know that that's the biggest era of pure design in all of automotive history. And there were still beautiful cars in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and today. But when you look at older cars, you just can't help but smile at some of the designs they came up with. It's really nostalgic in that way, and it's really just incredible how beautiful they were with flowing lines and everything was very different. And now you can kind of look at a four-door sedan and be like, what company is that from? And it's, well, maybe not Hyundai. Their designs are wild, which is actually really
Well,
cool.
I
to see.
believe
But
they actually
some of the older
they
stuff is,
actually
like,
found in the
very, very
basement
generic.
their stores of absinthe.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right. I mean, here's the bottom line, right? Like the 60s, I mean, even some 50s cars, like that sort of jet set era. Put a Jaguar E-Type now up against an F-Type.
As a lover of the F-Type, the F-Type is just an update to the XKR. Both very beautiful cars. I don't particularly like the E-Type. I wouldn't own one. I like the F-Type better. I like modern design a little bit better for sports cars. However, the E-Type is a more beautiful car in a traditional sense. In like every definition of the word. It's
right. Just real quick, Brad, I'm guessing I can't change your mind if you replace Coyote with Barra. I'm pretty sure you're on the Holden side of this particular fist fight at Bathurst. So it's just that era of we're shooting for the moon, literally, right? Now, like if we went to the moon, it would be like, what took us so long to go back kind of a deal, right? That was just a dream. That era just was, the design was, they literally were going for the stars. Like they were just dreaming big and people were, yeah, go.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's essentially what they did. They were like, hey, designers, here's a pen and a paper. We'll make it. We'll see if people like it. It's a lot of how the music industry kind of was. They were like, okay, make a song. Cool, we'll put it on the radio and see if people like it. It's the same with cars. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, we'll design this. We'll see if people like it and if it sells. That was how it worked, really. Mm-hmm. They're just like, well, there was no like market research and focus groups and this, that, and the other thing. It was just like, make it, sell it. If it doesn't sell, try something else. That's literally how it worked.
There was less of a quote-unquote nanny state sort of thing. One other thing I will say before moving on, in the they don't make them like they used to kind of category, is I believe the engineering as a whole is significantly better, i.e. cars are safer, they're i.e. stronger, better to their occupants, they make as much horsepower with using less fuel. They're just overall as an engineering exercise, they are better, but they're engineered to a point, right? So let's look at your V70R or your old V70R, right? They didn't think some kid from New Jersey was going to put a bigger turbo on it and send almost double the boost at her and go from there. Whereas, God bless them, the Japanese said, we're going to make this straight six. We have a handshake agreement that it won't make any more than 276 horsepower. And then you boost it to the moon to 800 horsepower on stock internals, right? But I mean, the 2J, the RB, and a lot of those engines do come with inherent flaws, right? Like, case in point, they're heavy as hell. Yeah. Christian's beloved LS is significantly lighter and can make just as much power, if not more, if you put the right sleeves into it. Like I think an LS, they're pushing 2,000 horsepower on LS blocks, sleeved LS blocks, and things like that.
That's crazy.
So like, I think where it all comes from, and I think where it stems from, is that we romanticize what was, right? You look back and you say, oh my gosh, life was so much simpler when I was younger. No bills, no kids, a job I didn't care if I lost. Mm-hmm. A lot of this sort of stuff, like you look back with like rose-colored glasses and you think it was just a better time. And then of course you see these cars in the flesh now built way better than they ever left the factory. So like when you get a rotisserie restoration ground up, that car is better in that form, even if everything is identical than it was the day it left the factory. These cars are just, they're beautiful. They're beautiful. Yeah. People romanticize about it, but if you were to spend 3 hours driving one, you'd want your freaking Kia hatchback back. It's just the nature of the beast. So
100%. Yeah, totally agree there. It's a trade-off. What we're really saying here is you need a modern car as a daily, and you need an older car as your fun thing.
Or you resto mod, preferably with a Coyote under the hood.
I would do a resto mod, but I would do an LS just to make you angry.
I don't hate the LS. It's just the Coyote's better.